Welcome to the Freight Project Podcast, brought to you by Ceresis, a North American third-party logistics company providing shippers transportation management, technology, and solutions.
On today's The Freight Project Podcast episode, I welcome Krenar Konami, founder and CEO of end-to-end supply chain visibility platform, Tive, Inc. Krenar and I will have an in-depth discussion about what Krenar and his team are up to at Tive to gain end-to-end supply chain visibility for shippers, 3PLs, and carriers, and we'll discuss the benefits that are realized when those entities have real-time information of visibility down to the shipment level. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Freight Project Podcast. Well, hello, Krenar. Welcome to the Freight Project Podcast. Since you are a first-time guest, we want to make sure that the listeners understand that you are here as a subject matter expert, and so they want to know, who are you, what company do you represent, and what's your background in the industry?
Perfect. Adam, thanks for having me here on the Freight Project Podcast. I'm very excited to be here. Let me maybe tell you a little bit about myself and my background. I don't come from the supply chain or logistics background. Kind of stumbled into this area through my journey here. My background is primarily in tech. I finished my master's in electrical engineering. My undergrad was in computer engineering and mathematics. And I started working for, when I was a junior, a company called Bitwave Semiconductor. And we were building the world's first 2G, 3G, 4G radio that goes on a chip. So it was pretty exciting. After that, joined an MIT startup called ETA Devices, where we built base stations. So those are the things that go on top of cell towers so we can make phone calls. So learned a lot around that space. We built very efficient base stations while at ETA Devices. And after that, I started a consulting firm helping companies like Viasat, Olympus, a few even military projects all around wireless communications, efficient wireless communications, and primarily a little bit focused on chip design. So as you can see, my background's all in tech. And you wonder, how did I get into this, the world of supply chain and get into this industry? But the way it happened is through family. So my father-in-law, my wife's dad, actually here in Worcester, Massachusetts, has a trucking company, G&G Trans, and just few trucks, 6 trucks, pretty much the average truck size, carrier size here in the United States. And I would go to his house and he would be always on the phone trying to figure out where his truck drivers were. So he would be calling truckers. Sometimes they would pick up the phone. And that's where I thought, you know what, I have all this experience. I know where cellular connectivity is going. I know where this market is headed. But why don't I just go and build the GPS tracker and put it in his truck? So I would go at night, go in the trucks, and when the truck drivers would come back, go and open up the CB radio location there, connect to the CB radio power source and put a little GPS tracker, built a little app for him so he could track his trucks. Then his friend, who had another 12 trucks, wanted to track the trucks. That's how it all started. But what happened is I realized that even the shippers who were putting the actual goods inside the trailer were putting these devices on the shipment. And these devices were these maybe USB loggers or temperature devices that were passive. They would monitor the temperature, but nothing in real time. They wouldn't get location information in real time. So it was all after the fact. And I asked one of the guys, how does this little device work? He told me, he's like, hey, they put it in the shipment. I'm like, how do they get the data? He's like, well, at the end of the shipment, somebody takes this device, plugs it into a machine or looks at it, sees if anything went wrong. But it was all after the fact. So it was not real-time visibility. And that's where the idea to actually put trackers on the goods, on the product, so the shippers and other logistics providers would know where the actual goods are instead of just knowing where the truck is came about.
Hey, how about that? Major points with the father-in-law. So Kudos for you on that one. But what a great startup founding story. It reminds you of, the famous and hallowed stories of people starting things in their garage, but, just life circumstances and a little bit of kismet and happenstance went your way. You're an industry and expertise knowledge on the tracking and the chips and the cellular communications, married someone, happened to be, a father in the trucking industry, and bam, it comes together and you have a business. And well, just for the listeners out there, what's the name of the business again?
My company is called Tive,
yeah.
But his Tive, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you first started with your father-in-law, G&G Transportation. Others truckers saw it and said, "Hey, I need that." Shippers were like, "Wait a minute, that's probably good for us too." And the name of the game today is real time, right? So some of the biggest things and probably the core thing that almost all new technologies, processes, and advancements in technologies like a blockchain or an Internet of Things, or even the use of active RFID instead of passive. Those things are all, around the idea of visibility, right? And I think some of the time, we forget, and we're kind of going to illuminate that today, that hardware is a part of that visibility. We talk a lot about these cloud-based technologies, but you also need something to speak back to that are close to the goods, where the truck is, so that people can see where their stuff is. So now that you've founded this hardware company, and like me, you didn't come from the industry. And I think that gives us an advantage. We ask more questions. We don't take things for granted because simply we don't know. And so we ask the fundamental questions and we start from there and we build on that. And so as you have built this company, asked all these questions, and you're looking to what is essentially bring real time and better supply chain visibility all the way down to that shipment level. Let's first kind of see how you define supply chain visibility. There's clearly a lot of definitions that span the industry, and maybe perhaps defining visibility really comes down to who you're asking. It might be you, me, your father-in-law, or even shippers. So from your perspective, how do you define and how are you seeing supply chain visibility? And then how do you address that with your potential customers so they don't simply, gloss over this buzzword that might have been overhyped at this point?
Yeah, very good very good question. It is overhyped a little bit, and there's a lot of definitions around visibility. There's one aspect of visibility where you can say, "Hey, I want visibility on my inventory. I want to know how many units of this particular SKU I have at my warehouse, at my DC, at the retail store. How many are on the shelf? How many are off the shelf?" That's one type of visibility, and those are what we call transactional based visibilities. They're happening at a particular site using some type of scanner, some type of point of sale system where you're trying to understand visibility of your product that way. But if you think of products, if you think of inventory, that inventory could be at the warehouse, could be at your DC, could be at the retail store, but inventory is also, it's in transit. And the working capital while in transit for a lot of companies is quite high. They're spending sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars of inventory in transit, whether it's in ocean, on road, on the air. And that's where we, as Tive, where we're really focused and hyper-focused on is in that in-transit visibility of where the goods are while in transit. And not knowing where those goods are while in transit, what companies have done to date is they just buffered everything. They've buffered safety stock, they've buffered inventory, they've buffered all the areas. Instead of having something at 10 days, they've buffered it to 30 days because they don't have visibility on what's going to happen and when that shipment's going to arrive, where is it. At the same time, the overall customer experience has suffered on that. But with the age of the Amazon, the so-called Amazon age or the Amazon effect, even on the B2B side, customers expect that same experience that they do when they buy a product off of e-commerce or internet. So that's what we're providing. We're providing, again, in-transit visibility of goods while they're on the move. And that's how we look at visibility. At Tive, we're in that real-time in-transit visibility. Not, because again, supply chain end-to-end visibility could mean a lot of things, but we're hyper-focused on an in-transit piece.
Yeah, the in-transit. Isn't that interesting? You log everything you got before it leaves. You check that it's damage-free and on time and actually the product that you ordered when it gets there. But in between, we have these out for delivery notifications or previously the delayed passive RFID information that folks were getting, where it wasn't the actual real time. It was, hey, a little bit ago. And at a moment's notice, something can happen, act of God, an accident, whatever. It goes to the wrong place, and you're kind of stuck, with some latency in time in order to deal with that. And imagine the proactivity and goodwill you can build towards customers by being ahead of those lost shipments or damaged shipments or whatever it might be. And imagine not having to keep, as you said, buffer inventory on hand. That's cash. Inventory is cash.
Yep.
And so, for folks to not have a solution to track accurately in between, and now that they do, I think that's huge, and so now that we see how you define supply chain visibility in transit at Tive, I'm really intrigued with your products that we briefly spoke about when we met at LogTech in September. And shout out to Eric Johnson for bringing us all together. A lot of smart people at that industry conference. I really highly recommended anyone to go.
Yep.
But can you tell our listeners a bit about what your products are specifically and how they continue to bring more visibility beyond just the product itself? Isn't there maybe some integration that has to happen?
Yeah, definitely we encourage integration. So if a customer is still using phone calls or spreadsheets and emails to look at loads, tender loads, start a particular shipment, then that's fine. It's very easy to use our platform, which we have a software platform where they log in and start a shipment and off they go. They can monitor shipments in real time that way. They can share those shipments with their customers. We encourage with the customers who actually have a transportation management system, we highly encourage them to integrate into that, because we want to make this process of visibility seamless for them. So that way they can take a tracker, load up a shipment, put the tracker at the end of the trailer on the last pallet, scan it, and put it in their TMS. And all in the back end, we integrate with a particular TMS that a customer has, and all the magic happens on the back end where we get the shipment information, customer gets the information about where that shipment is, and they don't need a lot more effort. It's just another field on a TMS. They're putting a lot of other things in there, so putting one more tracker number, it's quite easy to do. And suddenly, by just doing that, they have full visibility of that load throughout the journey. And what we're providing to our customers is not just location, which is that's the difference here. In fact, early on, one of the pharma customers, we were able to save them a load that had $1.5 million in that one single container, where we caught a reefer at 0 degrees Celsius, and it's supposed to be at 20 degrees Celsius. And it was a product launch for them, so we also saved them quite a bit on revenue. But it's not just temperature. We have a freight forwarder who ships to construction sites, and they were shipping to this construction site, and they noticed the truck was going to be late with these parts that were going for the workers that were waiting at that construction site. And they let the construction site, the customer know. They called the construction site. They told the workers they don't have to wait there. And they saved them a lot of money on labor just by not waiting for parts that were going to be late anyways.
Yeah, well, how about that? Those aren't even things, I think, especially the labor one, that us in the freight industry are even maybe thinking about, how better visibility and proactiveness can mean big savings in operational costs. Or in the case of the pharma company, imagine a product launch going badly and it failing right out the gate. That's not good. It's not good for whoever's involved in investing. It's definitely not good for the company, and it's definitely not good for the end customer who might have been waiting on that to be a big part of that success. So those are some amazing use cases of improved visibility when goods are in transit, beyond just simply providing good customer notifications that here's your stuff, right? Because I think that's where we all get kind of stuck. Is visibility is more than just where's my freight at right now. And I think we're seeing that evidenced. And you talk about integration into a TMS. Let's think about on the front end, right? Where TMS is increasingly becoming this integral hub, where on our side to get freight details correct, as an example. So you avoid reweighs and reclasses. We're using dimensionalizers that are capturing that data 100% accurately and integrating into the TMS to send the information back so it's all locked in. So that way your paperwork and your execution of the freight shipment is right. Now imagine how empowered the industry, freight forwarders, shippers are when they're proactively fixing problems while it's in transit. And at the end, if anything occurs, that front end capture of the dimensionalizer, it took pictures of the freight so you can kind of see, okay, this was damaged compared to when it left on this date. That's an extreme amount of visibility, and the shippers and carriers are really the beneficiaries. And then in customers are doing pretty well. Because you imagine a whole truckload of seafood, as an example, versus that pharma story, but the temperature's not there. One, how do we know? And did it get to a customer where it was bad? Did that lead to a recall or some disease? Or two, if you can save that, that's a lot of good stuff for the environment and for the company who made that fish. So those are really good use cases. Now, let me ask you this. Your product iteration, as you've kind of gotten into this, what are some of the things as far as applications beyond what you've already said with the pharma company and the construction company? What other uses are people seeing from the Tive Inc. products?
We have, so good question. Mentioned the pharma company. We have a very large CPG company who, one of the challenges that they have is they have a push to get to 100% end-to-end visibility across their shipments. And again, here, what I mean by visibility is while in transit. And it's really difficult to do that with software-based only tools, which I'll dive into later on. And getting to 90+% visibility across all their shipments, that's when you actually enable yourself to do some interesting things around your overall supply chain. That's when you get to do supply chain optimization and increase efficiencies and reduce your safety stock. With 20-30% visibility across your shipments, you don't get to do things like that. So we have a customer who's getting to 100% end-to-end visibility using our products. At the same time, there are customers who have lost, for instance, a particular container shipping vanilla, and their insurance has gone up quite a bit. And now they use our trackers on their shipments, and they were able to actually get an insurance reduction for their freight. So there's lots more examples I can give you. So when I started the company, there was definitely where I realized there was a pull from the market. Yes, with my father-in-law, who I helped track his trucks, but also one of my software engineers had met a VP of manufacturing of this large telecommunications company. They actually manufacture hardware for telecom, and they wanted to know where their shipments are, because at the sites where they would install this equipment, the installers sometimes would be waiting and there was no equipment. They would be charging $150, $250 an hour by just sitting there. So having that visibility across their shipments to the sites where they were going to install this hardware was interesting. So they actually wanted to start a pilot as soon as possible, even when we just had the initial concepts of the product. And then the other time when I really saw a need in the market, when I went to a pharma conference and I had our device, it was still on a 3D printed case. And this team, when I explained it to them on a hallway, 2 weeks later, they sent me a PO. They wanted to start a pilot because they wanted real-time visibility. They didn't want just these passive loggers that would monitor temperature of the shipment, but at the end of the shipment, you would know what happened with that. Being able to be proactive if something goes wrong, as I gave you in the few examples earlier, is very important. And that's where I really saw that there's a need in this market. That's how Tive started. And after that, we grew the team, got investments from venture capitals here in Boston, and we've been growing quite fast, and it's been very exciting.
Well, very cool. Well, Boston, a growing logistics technology hub, that's for sure. I've met a few companies already from there in that space. So, I'm wondering, when you have these conversations with folks, do you ever get challenged? Do people go, hey, look, this is cool, but is it really necessary? I mean, we have RFID that's getting more active. The ELD mandate put all of these electronic logging devices inside of trucks? Can't we just use that stuff to get the same result? What do you tell the people when they ask you that or challenge you a little bit? How do you differentiate yourself from maybe those assumptions about real-time in-transit visibility?
Yeah, there some customers ask these questions, but most customers, what we've noticed, they already somehow have hit a limit. They've hit a wall around visibility, and they come to us and say, okay, now we need this type of visibility because we cannot get all the information that we need from ELD. We've hit a wall on the percentage of compliance across all the shipments that we have. We can only see 30% of shipments on ELD. Some customers are at 65%. But again, to get to that 90+% visibility across their shipments, they realize they actually have to put something on their product, something on the goods that are going inside that trailer so they can track that trailer, regardless of the smartphone, truck driver smartphone. So you don't want to track, it's great to track the truck driver, but you really want to track your product. Not all the trucks and carriers have integrations with their ELD and GPS, so it's difficult to get that data sometimes. And you have third-party carriers coming to pick up your load, especially on peak season. So the only way to actually get that full end-to-end visibility is by putting what we have, cellular connected devices. So these are devices that trackers that go on the back of the trailer, and they close the door, and they're connecting straight from the device straight to the cloud. And if you think of RFIDs, you're right. There was a big wave, especially when the Walmart back in the day did the mandate. So almost all the products have RFID. However, the challenge with RFID was the infrastructure. So RFIDs were primarily passive, and you needed these gates. So when an RFID tag would pass, these gates would scan it, and that's how you know where your inventory and where your products were. But again, these were at transactional type of visibility, like I was talking earlier on during our conversation. Whereas with cellular connected devices, the infrastructure is already out there. Companies like AT&T, Nokia, Ericsson, T-Mobile, Vodafone have spent billions and billions of dollars creating this infrastructure for us that's amazing. And we're just utilizing that and telling our customers where their product is in real time. So there's regardless of the carrier, regardless of the ELD provider, regardless of the smartphone. I used an example. I had an interview at Supply Chain Brain, and this was actually an example given to me from one of the investors that I was speaking with. Kind of this concept of over the top. Think of like Disney Plus just came right now recently, right? And we go to Disney Plus and watch the movies. We don't need to go to a cable company. We go to Netflix. We don't need to go through the cable company. All we need is the internet and this HDMI stick that goes in behind the TV. And same thing here. Think of this as the HDMI stick that goes behind the trailer on your goods, and you skip all of the requirement to integrate to some ELD or to some smartphone app. That app fatigue, you skip all of that, and it's pretty amazing. And customers see that. And we have customers who are switching from these other platforms to ours because they say, hey, Krenar, I am 100% reliability now on my shipments. I place this tracker on the back of the truck. I know exactly where it is. I'm not worried whether the trucker is going to turn off his app. I'm not worried about anything.
Yeah, you kind of bring a constant to so many variables that get in the way of the
Correct.
Consistent visibility, right? And so that piece of hardware is key. Now, I think where the rubber meets the road is, to these entities. You talked about app fatigue, right? And I'm sure that they'd rather have a single view when it comes to visibility. And we talked earlier about the role of TMS and integration into that. And so I have to assume that you probably have customers that are TMS providers or partners in some way. We're seeing more and more of that. So what do you think the role of integration is moving forward? And kind of exactly how does your product integrate into a TMS to provide that kind of single pane of glass for the entity using the TMS?
Yeah, good question. I mean, you're right. There are customers out there who have invested so much into their TMS, and they've done a lot of work with that transportation management systems. They really don't want to jump from software to software to software to software just to see where a particular truck is. So integration is essential with customers like that. And what we do is, as I mentioned earlier, we make it seamless for them. So in the TMS, that's where they're starting the shipment. That's where they're inputting everything. And that's where they also input the tracker number. And it's quite easy then on the back end. We do all the magic with APIs and get the shipment information from TMS and then send TMS information about where the shipment is. And some TMSs don't want all the information that we have. Some TMSs just want alerts or events when there's particular delays, if the shipment's idle, if it actually went outside of a route geofence or hit a particular geofence or temperature excursion. So they just want those alerts. Some TMSs want to consume more data. But what we've noticed, customers still come back to our platform where they want to dig in deeper because all the data is there, all the sensor metrics are there. But overall, to start a shipment, to see what's happening with that shipment and just being able to have confidence that they have that visibility, integrating with TMS is essential. And everybody's fighting for the screen. What we want to be is great if customers come to our screen because we have a wonderful screen and get to see, like I said, the analysis across the shipments, but being that bloodstream of visibility, providing that constant, like you said, moving away from the variable, going to that constant that, hey, with Tive, I know I will have visibility and it's going to be reliable 100% of the time. That's what we want to become.
Absolutely. And I think you're right at the right place in time where more than ever shippers are seeing the value of technology. I think as kind of a Wizard of Oz kind of play where you're behind the curtain, happy to be that as the bloodstream powering the visibility industry. Also helps shippers in that you're not out here necessarily forcing it down their throats. Exactly. You're saying we want to sit right beside the existing processes you're doing today. We simply just want to give you real-time information around those processes and those shipments that you're already doing, and will simply be the constant in the wilderness of variables where you have a lot going on. And the more you're empowered, and especially if you get to this place where you go, I have extreme confidence, that does a lot for you as an organization to continue to go up, kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, up the pyramid where you become really an evolved, advanced shipper who's not just focusing on how to get freight from point A to point B, which sounds a lot easier than it really is, but you're focusing on how do we launch a new product? How do we strategically compete? How do we gain market share? And you use that freight confidence, that logistics confidence as a competitive advantage. So that's really great. And so before I let you go, we're on the cusp, I think, of end-to-end visibility, but will it ever truly be solved? And why or why not? And if so, how will it be solved? And how close are we as an industry in reality? I'm a very optimistic person by nature, so I believe it will get solved. Will it be done in a year or two? I don't think so. But I think in the next 10 years, we're going to get as close to where we want to be as we can. Obviously, as you know, perfection, getting to that 100.00% visibility across everything in the globe is not going to happen. But that we're going to get that slowly but surely. And one thing that's pulling this is when markets want something, and I think market wants this and needs this. And the reason is because supply chain automation is happening. And you know that. I mean, I'm sure you've seen in the industry, the automation inside the four walls already has happened quite a bit. Look at the Amazon warehouses, look at other warehouses that are being built, look at distribution centers. Inside those four walls, customers almost know exactly what's happening inside that factory, where the inventory is, when is it going out, what's coming in. All of that, it's inside the four walls has been done very well, whether it's with technology, whether it's IoT that place sensors on various places, where it placed a lot of robots, as you can tell. But that next step of automating the supply chain outside of those four walls, that's what needs to happen. And
for that to happen, you need to measure. You need to measure what's happening with your goods, with that inventory while in transit. And as these sensors become more cost effective, as our hardware becomes more cost effective, as we start going into more and more shipments, that's where we see that we're going to get close to that 100% visibility across all those shipments. And that's when you can start applying some amazing algorithms and making the overall supply chain a big software piece where you can actually run your algorithms and make it very efficient, and get to that end-to-end visibility goal. So when you have visibility of your goods while in transit and you see that retail, let's say store A has surplus of inventory, and you see that retail store B, the things are flying off the shelf of that same product, instead of you were going en route to deliver to retail store A, you can reroute in real time, go to retail store B and do a shipment there instead of at retail store A. That's the holy grail. And the only way that's going to happen is if we know exactly what's happening with the goods while in transit and where they are. And we're going to get there. We're definitely going to get there.
That's right. It'll go beyond the simple question of where's my stuff or where's my freight to what's the condition of the freight? Where's it at right now? How can we make this proactive decision? And I think what we're going to see in the industry as more technology comes into place that integrates into that central hub that is a TMS, and we're seeing it as a TMS provider ourselves more and more, that companies are coming together to put some specialized features right within that TMS to make everybody's life a little bit easier and to move away from reactionary questions to come to a place of proactive, strategic, data-driven decision-making. And it's companies that are still making great hardware solutions, not just stuff that's only software, but great hardware that talks to software to make a supply chain almost a software program in and of itself, where we sit back and hit a couple buttons and we take a long lunch break and our stuff is still damage free and gets there on time. So Krenar, thank you so much for imparting upon our listeners your absolute wisdom as an outsider, now an insider. So doing some great work in visibility for in-transit visibility with Tive Inc. Where can they find out more about your company, Krenar?
Google.
There you go.
Tive, Tive, or you can go to tive.co, tive.co.
Easy enough. Well, thanks so much, Krenar. We'll make sure folks can get a link to that on this podcast publishing page. And for all of those listeners out there who tune in each week to listen to the experts here on the Freight Project podcast, we thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.